Would you give your home address to a stranger standing on the street? What about your social security number? What about your fingerprints? Probably not. That's really creepy. But what if it was for a cookie? In 2014, New York-based artist Risa Puno set up a stand on the street to sell cookies. The twist was that instead of selling them in exchange for cash, she sold them in exchange for personal information. Now, while you're thinking about whether to give Risa, fill out her form, giving her your personal information in exchange for one of these fine-looking cookies, let me give you just a little bit more information. So we'll turn over the form here, where we see the privacy policy in excruciatingly fine print, as they are. Let me help you out a bit and give you some excerpts. They include, none of your content will be subject to any obligation of confidence. Your secrets are not safe with Risa. And under no circumstances will she be responsible for any kind of loss you incur by giving her your information, even if she could foresee these problems. So you're basically giving her free rein to do whatever she wants with your information. And the thing is, this isn't all that unusual. We agree to similar policies all the time. In fact, we usually don't even read them. So by the end of the day, how many people do you think Risa got to hand in their personal information in exchange for a cookie? Maybe a handful? Maybe a dozen crazy people? 380. 380 people were willing to give up their personal information in exchange for a mere cookie. And this is just one example. We're often really willing to give our personal information in exchange for very small rewards, like a cookie, or even no material benefit at all. Take Facebook, where we often fill out these quizzes to, I guess, satiate our curiosity, maybe our vanity. So if I want to find out what my baby will look like if I married a celebrity, I basically have to fork over all my Facebook information, my name, my contact information, friends list, photos, and so on. And sometimes the benefits of sharing are even fuzzier, like here. But the dangers are very real, right? Those drunken photos we post of ourselves in the heat of the moment, they can quickly come back to haunt us. Take job searches. Most employers look to our social media presence when they're evaluating us, and let's just say that often causes them to reconsider us. But it's not that we just don't care about privacy at all. In fact, we often express grave and very real concerns for our privacy, even on Facebook, where periodically there's this rumor that circulates that Facebook is going to share all your information, including all your private messages, unless you post this legalistic message explicitly forbidding Facebook to do so. And lots of people do this. And so it's this discrepant behavior that really fuels my curiosity for the research I do in this area. We have a paradox on our hands. In the abstract, we say we care about privacy, and I believe us. But in the moment, when push comes to shove, our behavior often suggests otherwise. So when we think of the boundary between being private on the one hand and open and transparent on the other, we like to think that we've drawn this clear line in the sand, that there's a line that we just won't cross. Like maybe we'd give Risa our name, maybe our email, but our fingerprints, we draw the line at that. But in reality, what my research with collaborators George Lowenstein and Alessandro Acquisti has been finding is that this line, to the extent that it even exists at all, is incredibly malleable. So if we throw a cookie into the equation, then suddenly we share our fingerprints. So things that you'd think wouldn't really move us around can turn out to matter a great deal. Why is this the case? Well, privacy is an incredibly abstract concept. You can't really pinpoint its material value with any degree of precision. Like, how much privacy have you lost if someone catches a glimpse of your naked body? Or what's the full extent of the damages you incur if someone steals your identity? My point is that the economic value of privacy can't be pinpointed with any degree of precision, so the psychological value is even fuzzier. And because of this fuzziness, privacy just isn't top of mind, and so our willingness to reveal can be affected by seemingly trivial things like a cookie. Privacy is not something we're thinking about. We're not thinking about the potential dangers of sharing, and then if you pair that with putting something tangible and immediate and attractive right in front of us like a cookie, and then we become very forthcoming. So Risa did a pretty good job of getting lots of people to reveal their information to her. But could she have gotten even more information out of people? Well, what if, for example, on the theme of things that we wouldn't think would move us but actually do, what if Risa had played around with the order of questions? So imagine I asked you this question. It's kind of stark on its own, but what if, before asking you this question, I asked you this question? Now suddenly it doesn't feel so bad to admit to having called in sick when you weren't sick. So we tested this idea in a series of experiments where we presented people with questions that ran the gamut from super tame to very intrusive, and we just varied the order in which we asked the questions. And sure enough, what we found was that when a given question, like calling in sick when you're not sick, when it was preceded by a much more sensitive behavior, a full 71% of people are willing to admit to calling in sick when they weren't sick. However, when the same question is preceded by a tame softball question like this one, eating meat, poultry, or fish, now only 61% of people are willing to admit to calling in sick when they weren't sick. So what we see here is a contrast effect, right? Calling in sick just doesn't seem so bad when it's directly contrasted with a much more sensitive behavior. So here we see something arbitrary that we think would be arbitrary, like the order of the questions, can shift us more towards being transparent. Now, what about something that's not trivial? What about something that should matter? Do we react appropriately? Are we alarmed when we should be alarmed? Well, with this question in mind, what if Risa, instead of making her survey look like this, what if she made it look like this? So we tested this idea. What we did was we asked people, again, a ton of sensitive questions, and this time we just varied the look and feel of the online survey. So some people we asked questions on a very official-looking website, like this. Well, first of all, we're not designers, but this is our best effort at something official and professional-looking. So when you see this, what do you think? You think, I'm going to get in trouble if I admit to driving drunk, trying cocaine, fantasizing about rape. Other people, we asked the very same questions, but on a really unprofessional-looking site. So we had to, of course, cook up such a site. For starters, what font do you think we used? Unprofessional site. Comic Sans, obviously. Here's what we came up with. Now, of course, to this crowd, it's no surprise that the look and feel of an online survey, of an interface, is at least somewhat predictive of how dangerous it is to divulge on it, right? So on average, sites that look unprofessional, they do generally a worse job at protecting information that's shared on it relative to more professional-looking sites. But despite this, what happened? What happened with people's actual disclosure behavior? Well, first, here are the admission rates in the official-looking site. But the question is, what happens in the unprofessional site? Here's what happens. Now, 30% of people are willing to admit that they've driven while drunk, compared to only 17% on the professional site. Trying cocaine, 7%. Fantasizing about rape, a full 31% of people admitting to this now. So people, it seems, are more willing to share this really sensitive stuff on a site that's representative of more dangerous places to share. And I should say that we asked a separate group of people which site they thought was more dangerous, so we showed them a screenshot of the official-looking site and the unprofessional site, and people get it. Like, they say, you should stay far away from that unprofessional site. But when it comes to their behavior, like when you don't remind people to think about privacy and dangers, what we find, of course, is that this site, because it's casual-looking and fun and frivolous, it's disarming. It keeps privacy concerns at bay, in turn eliciting disclosure. So what we've seen here is something that you'd think would really creep us out and move us towards being totally private actually had the opposite effect of making us super transparent. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take a different perspective. I want you to take Risa's perspective. It's the end of the day. You've got a giant pile of surveys to go through. You're going through them. What would you think of these people? Specifically, what would your impression be of someone who is really forthcoming, like this person, they answered all of the questions, versus someone who was less forthcoming and left a lot of the questions blank? We posed this thought experiment to our survey participants, specifically asking them what they thought of someone who answered all of a survey's questions versus someone who opted out of answering some of the questions. So for example, in one study, we asked people, who would you rather date? Would you rather date this respondent who admits to frequently stealing stuff, expensive stuff, or we said, would you rather date someone who just opted out of answering the question? Now, admittedly, neither of these is exactly fine specimen to be dating, but if you had to choose, who would you choose? And the answer might surprise you, at least it surprised me. People prefer to date the person who admits to frequently doing something really bad. In fact, this is the worst answer you can give on this scale, right? Relative to someone who just opts out of answering. And it's not just this question, we see it again here. We also see it for this question. People would prefer to date someone who frequently, I know, it's just like makes me cringe every time I think about it, who neglects to tell a partner that they have an STD. They'd rather date someone who frequently does this than someone who simply opts out of answering. So what the heck is going on? Well, we have a natural predisposition to like people who disclose to us because self-disclosure is a key part of forging relationships with others, which is a pretty important part of being human. And so when someone abstains from this activity, when they opt out of answering questions, we view them as untrustworthy and we don't like them. So much so that we'd rather, again and again we find this, we'd rather date someone, we'd rather hire someone who just comes clean and admits their faults, even if those faults are like really bad, relative to someone who just chooses not to answer, even though, of course, the person who opts out of answering could be doing so for completely innocuous reasons. So in sum, I've talked about how when we're in the position to reveal information, we can be moved around by arbitrary things like the order of the questions. What's more is that sometimes things that should be alarming can actually have the opposite effect of being disarming, causing us to reveal more in the situations where we probably shouldn't be revealing. On top of that, when we choose to not disclose, we pay a social penalty because other people view us as untrustworthy and unlikable. So all of these things are really a challenge for how we manage this boundary between being private and being transparent. But I don't want to end on a total downer note. So there's good news. I have cookies for you, but there's a catch. The catch is you can only have one if you give me your fingerprints. Thanks.